shall come and shall take the harvest home. From the field shall in that day all offenses cast away. Giving angels charge at last in the fire and tempest. But the fruitful years to store in God's garden evermore. Then, O church triumphant, come, raise the song of harvest home. All are safely gathered in, free from sorrow, free from sin. There forever purified, in God's presence to abide. Come, 10,000 angels, come, raise the song of harvest home. And our second song will be number 584, Jesus Be the Center. Number 584. Jesus, be the center, be my source, be my life, Jesus. Jesus, be the center, be my hope, be my God, Jesus. Be the fire in my heart, be the wind in these sails, be the reason that I live, Jesus, Jesus, be my vision, be my path, be my guide, Jesus. Be the fire in my heart, be the wind in these sails, be the reason that I live, Jesus, Jesus, be the center, be my source, be my life, Jesus. Be the fire in my heart, be the wind in these sails, be the reason that I live, Jesus, Jesus. Be my source, be my life, Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. Thank you. You may be seated.
At this time, we will ask Bernadine Schwartzentruber to come up here. She is the Vice President of the Heritage Association. Heritage Association has been sponsoring these events. So Bernadine, if you would come and share a bit.
Good evening, everyone, and we're glad to see you all here. Our president couldn't be here this weekend, so I'm taking his place. The AMHA Board welcomes you tonight to our Continuing Legacy 500 series. The board appreciates the hard work of the Legacy Committee, consisting of Evan Zaire, Norm Mosier, and Rosanna Moser, in finding our speakers and doing the logistical work in organizing these programs. To refresh your memories, many of you have attended most of these services. We began in the spring of 2019 with Paul Zaire, originally from our community, and then Arnold Snyder of Ontario, I believe, that fall. And then COVID canceled the 4 planned programs for 2020 and 2021. In the fall of 2022, our speaker was Dan Ziegler, and Lynn Miller was with us this past spring. On a personal note, I've always been interested in Mennonite history, and when I was a child, I think about 10 years old, we lived in Ohio, and one Sunday evening we went to a non-Mennonite church to watch a movie, black and white, on Martin Luther. I think it was called Here I Stand. And you know, we didn't see many movies back then, so that really impressed me. And then later on, when I lived in Pennsylvania, at summer Bible school in 7th grade, each student got a book. And the book was Henry's Red Sea, a historical fiction book for young people about the European Mennonites and how they got through Germany, I guess, and the zone to get to Bremerhaven, to get onto that ship to go to Paraguay. And I don't know how many times I've read that book, but those incidents sparked my interest and made me aware of the larger Mennonite community in the world. So we're glad to welcome you tonight.
We're glad you're all here. And we're glad that Nelson is here also. It was interesting when I called Nelson about, I don't know, 3-4 years ago about coming. At that point, Paul had been here and then also Arnold Snyder. And Nelson's comment was, boy, you've had some big guns up there. And I said, that's why I'm calling you. So, so we're... I don't remember. That's what I heard. So anyway, we're glad you're here, Nelson. Nelson pastored for some time in Vermont. Many of you remember Carmelita Miller, married a gentleman from Vermont. He attended, and they attended the church where Nelson pastored. And Nelson says he was here for the wedding. So you were here, you met him probably, or saw him. Nelson also spent time in London, was involved with the London Mennonite Center there for a program director or something there for a while. Pastored, I understand, in London. Also has pastored in, as I said, Vermont and also Indiana. He's authored several books. One of them is this one, which is the most recent, entitled Stuck Together, meaning that we're all part of the family of God and somehow we're going to have to get along with each other. Even though we see things differently, somehow God expects his kids to halfway get along, I guess. He was also president of the Anabaptist Mennonite Biblical Seminary in Indiana for a period of time, president of World Conference, and has recently now led several tours to Israel and spent a year in Israel. Got back 5 days before things hit the fan over there, and so he's got a lot of firsthand experience. So, Nelson, we are glad you are here, and looking forward to hearing what you have to say. So.
Thank you, Evan, and thanks to the Heritage Association for your planning and your thinking about the Anabaptist 500th anniversary coming up in 2027. And I've been in touch. I had breakfast with John Roth just a couple of days ago. He's coordinating a lot of the planning there, and we were working on some of the plans for 2027. I'm not employed by Mennonite World Conference anymore. I was never employed by Mennonite World Conference. I was chair of the board, so I was not paid and salaried and running the shop. I was with the governing committee, but that was really a privilege. But you people here in Lowville are both looking to your past for inspiration as you think about the future, and that's really good. Our theme these days that we're together this year is God was in Christ, reconciling the world to himself and giving to us the ministry of reconciliation. 2 Corinthians 5. Paul, the apostle, laid down his life for the unity of the church and to take the gospel across boundaries. He did that all his life. And so we have so much to learn from him. And I recently spent the better part of a year with my wife Ellen in Bethlehem. We were there with Mennonite Central Committee, and I was teaching at Bethlehem Bible College. How many of you have been to Israel, Palestine? I'd just be interested to see. There's a few people here. Anyone at Bethlehem Bible College? Did anyone get there? That's a college that has a lot of connections with the Mennonite Church. Mennonites were involved from the beginning. It's not a Mennonite school, but Mennonites have been closely involved, and they are deeply committed to peacemaking and to sharing the gospel in the West Bank and beyond. And so it was my privilege to be there for a year. And mostly tonight I'm showing pictures, and I have no script here. I'm just going to talk about pictures and let you see something of what we experienced. So it's called A Year in Palestine. Let's see if I can get this thing up. There we go. Before I go into the events or the specific experiences we had, I want to talk about Zionism and the whole idea of who owns this land. That gets discussed a lot on television and radio preachers and popular books. So I want to talk about Zionism and the changing map of Palestine, and to understand the conflict as it goes on yet today. You really have to look back to the first century, to when the city of Jerusalem was destroyed in AD 70. The Roman Empire controlled all of the Mediterranean basin at that time. In the whole New Testament era, Roman Empire controlled the world. A decree went out from Caesar Augustus that who should be taxed? The whole world. The whole world. So it seemed like the Romans controlled everything. And the most successful revolt against Rome in the first century was by the Jews. They said, we're going to throw you out. We're going to get you out of our country. So they revolted in 66. And in 70, the Romans finally completed their reconquest of Palestine, and Jerusalem was destroyed. There was a second revolt then in the second century against the Romans. The Jews tried again. It was even worse. And then the Jews were just scattered. So Jews have not controlled Palestine for almost 2,000 years until the last century. And Jesus saw this coming. Jesus says in Luke 21, when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, you know that its desolation is near. And Jesus basically tells his disciples, when that revolt comes, he saw it on the horizon, he said, you don't participate in that. You get out of here. You get out of the city and head for the hills, because this is going to be bad, and it's not your agenda. Don't take part in that. So Jesus warned his followers. Now, Jews very early on were scattered all over the Eastern Mediterranean. The red dots here show substantial Jewish communities. There was a huge community in Alexandria, Egypt, for example. At the time Jesus was born, there was already a lot of Jews before the city of Jerusalem was destroyed. There was a lot of Jews scattered in the Eastern Mediterranean. So when Jesus' parents took him to Egypt to get away from Herod, they weren't going to just any old foreign country. They were going to a place where they had cousins and family, and they were going. But the Jews got scattered all over the Eastern Mediterranean. And then, let me back up here. Then this map, this confusing map, just shows you all the places that the Jews scattered to in over a period of 2,000 years. And the dates that are on here, usually see 1394 and 1492 and so forth. Those dates are all dates when Jews that had settled in that part of the world were expelled. So Jews were just constantly harassed. And a lot of this was by Christians. The Christian church had decided that Jews were Christ killers. They were accused of deicide, killing God. And so the Jews were harassed and despised. Even Martin Luther, who I saw that same movie that Bernadine talked about many years ago. Martin Luther said we should burn down their synagogues, we should tear up their Torahs. They have no right to exist. Even major leaders of the Reformation. So the Jews had a very difficult time, often at the hands of Christians. At the end of the 19th century in Europe, there was an Austrian Zionist, a Jewish man named Theodor Herzl, who founded what came to be known as the modern Zionist movement. He wrote a book or pamphlet in 1896 called Der Judenstaat, the Jewish state, the Jewish country. And he was anticipating the possibility of Jews getting back to the Holy Land, getting back to where many of the Jews originally came from. So there's a mountain right at the edge of Jerusalem today called Mount Herzl. He's a hero. He was not a religious man, and I would underscore that the Zionist impulse, when I use the word Zionism, I mean the impulse to get Jews back to their homeland and be able to live there. That's what I mean by Zionism. The early Zionist movement was not religious. It was more communist and socialist. Some of these people, Jewish people specifically, did not believe in God. They wanted to reestablish a homeland. And today, the majority of Jews are secular. That is, the majority of Jews are not worshiping Jewish people in Palestine. In Jerusalem, the majority is worshiping. But you go to Tel Aviv, and it's a very secular place. Now, inspired by Herzl and others, Jews started to buy up property. I wonder if I can use this as a pointer. Would that be allowed? Oh, I won't break your screen. If I had a red pointer, I would, but the red pointer doesn't work on this kind of screen. Hey, this is marvelous. Okay. Sea of Galilee there, Dead Sea, Jordan River, Mediterranean Sea here. So you recognize this from your Bibles? This black land is land that Jewish people purchased in the late 18th century and the early part of the 20th century. So the first wave of Jews getting back to Palestine happened before World War I. And it was Jewish people coming back, purchasing land. So you see they got possession of considerable amount of land and generally got along with the Palestinian people. When I use the term Palestinian people, I'm referring to the indigenous people of the land. That is, the people that were there all along. When the Jews left, it was still a populated area, and it was a mixture of people. They had some Jewish blood, they had some Arab blood. People came from other parts of the world, and so it's a culture, Arab Muslim culture, that prevailed and controlled much of Palestine. But the Jewish people had money, and they were able to come in and purchase land. Then you get to, you probably recognize what this is, the Holocaust. And the harassment and killing of Jews reached its worst. during the time of Hitler. And there was up to 6 million Jews that were slaughtered. It's a wound, a psychic wound in a people that is very, very deep and lingers today. You and I remember Anabaptists that were martyred 500 years ago. This is in living memory for the oldest people still alive. So that disaster still really shapes a lot of Jewish consciousness. And you might, just as an aside, at the back, there's a museum in Jerusalem called Yad Vashem. It's the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem. And at the back of that museum, which is a very sobering thing to see, and I believe it, and I'm not a Holocaust denier. This happened. This is really history. You go around the back, and there's plaques on banks there with thousands of names of Gentiles who helped protect the Jews during the time of Hitler. So you get to Poland, and there's maybe 1,200 names, and you get to France, and there's 2,000 names. There's a lot of names that the Jewish people call this the Garden of the Righteous Gentiles. There's on that plaque there are 4 Americans, and one of them is a Mennonite. And her name is right there at the bottom, Lois Mary Gundin. They put the last name first. And she was working for MCC, working in a refugee, not a refugee camp, an orphanage. And she helped to shelter 18 or 20 Jewish children and not reveal that these were Jewish, even though the Gestapo was all around them. So she's honored. And one of my recent tours, I had her nephew along, and he was quite interested to see this. Now, let me see if I get to the British Mandate. No, I don't see something. Okay, I don't have. At the end of World War II, you might recall World War II was both against the Germans and the Americans were against the Germans and the Japanese and the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire controlled a lot of the Middle East and North Africa. So at the end of World War I, let me get this right. At the end of World War I, the Ottoman Empire was destroyed, and the British were given they were given something called the British Mandate. That is, the British were to control the area that we recognize today as Jordan and Israel, and I think maybe a bit into Iraq. So British were to control that area until self-governance could emerge. That was the intention of the League of Nations at that point. It wasn't the United Nations, it was the League of Nations. Self-governance will emerge. So, and then there was an area that the French controlled. These allied powers kind of divided up and said, we're going to run these countries until they can run themselves. So the United Nations came up with a plan to divide, that they would divide this land between Israel. They create 2 new countries, Israel, which is the yellow there, and Palestine, which is the green. So you recognize that the proposed country of Israel was going to more or less follow the area that the Jewish people had already purchased. So that sort of made sense. And the city of Bethlehem now this plan is all the way in 1947. This is at the end of the British Mandate. The British controlled it from about 1920 until 1948. So this is at the end of the British Mandate. Now it's the United Nations, not the League of Nations. The United Nations says this will be Palestine, Palestine, Palestine. You see these areas are not quite even connected. And Israel here. And Jerusalem will be neither country. It's going to be an international city that all peoples have access. So it won't be either the Jewish people or the Arabs that control it. The Jewish people said, fine, we'll take it. This looks like a good deal. Palestinians said, no way, because the Palestinians had vastly more people in the land at that point, and the Jewish people only owned, what was it, less than 10% or maybe 6% of the whole land. You mean they purchased that amount of land, and now they get they get huge areas, and the Palestinians rejected it because the ports right here went to Israel. Gaza is not really a proper port. The best farmland and fields are here and around the Sea of Galilee, and Israel is going to get most of the desert. The Palestinians said, no way, we don't accept this. So the British said, okay, we're announcing to the world, we're going to leave the area. We're just going to leave in May of 1948. We're just going to get out. And as soon as that happened, the instant that happened, Israel declared themselves to be a state. They said, even if Palestinians aren't ready for this agreement, we're going to establish a state. So there's David Ben-Gurion's first prime minister standing, making this proclamation in Tel Aviv in May of 1948. Well, immediately, the Arab nations, it wasn't just the Palestinians in the region, the Arab nations said, we're going to war against this country, this new country. We're going to snuff it out before it ever gets established. So there was a war, and Israel prevailed. Israel had superior weapons, had huge financial backing from Britain and from the United States, from Jewish communities around the world. They had better trained armies. So even though they didn't have a bigger army, they had a huge tactical advantage, and they won the war. Now, what happens in the years since then is this map here is something that anyone that pays attention to the struggle in the Middle East will see at some point. It shows the way the balance of land between Palestinians and Jews and Israel has changed. So here, in this case now, the yellow is Palestinian territory. So in 1897, before the Jewish settlers arrived, Palestinians pretty much controlled all that. Now, saying that, you have to bear in mind that they still were under the Ottoman Empire at this point. So the Ottomans are kind of the empire controlling things, but locally it was Palestinians. Then you see by 1946, Jewish people have purchased the green land, all that, there's little green bits there. 1947, this was the proposed partition plan that I talked about, that this was proposed, but that was never really accepted. But as the war progresses in 48 and 49, 1948 and 49, the Israeli armies push in to take Jerusalem or just up to the old city, and they take all this territory. So the Palestinians are left with this right here, and Gaza. And then in the present, well, I'll get to this in a few minutes, but in the present now, this area, let me back up. This area right here is called the West Bank. Why the West Bank? Because it's the west bank of the Jordan River. The Jordan River has two banks. This is the East Bank. This is the West Bank. This is the East Bank right here. So the West Bank, what is referred to as West Bank of the Jordan River, is the area that a lot of Palestinians have been sort of squeezed into. And now in recent years, in the last couple of decades, Israel has been establishing towns and even small cities in Palestinian territory. And absolutely the root of the problem in the conflict right now is, and I think this is the case for the whole last 75 years, is that one people with power and a lot of international backing especially from the United States and some European states, namely Israel. They have the big guns, they have the Air Force, they have nuclear weapons. It's a sophisticated society. They are gradually taking the land of a people with less power. It's that simple. You know, people say it's a very complex story, a very complex thing. It's not. One people is taking the land of another, of people who have lived there for centuries. I know any number of Palestinian people who say they can trace their lineage. They think they can trace it all the way back to the Apostolic Church. You know, this is our land, and it's being taken. That's what the anger is about. You wonder, why is Hamas so angry? It's that simple. It's this taking of land and then the harassment they experience. So in 1948, when Israel conquered a lot of the land right up to Jerusalem, there were 750,000 Palestinians that were displaced from their homes. They were just, and what they were told was, look, there's a war going on and it's going to get bad. Leave, and when the trouble is over, you can come back. You can come back here. You know, pack a suitcase, take your house key, you can come back, and they were never allowed back. And so the Palestinians still talk of the right of return. The right of return. They want to be able to get back to their land, and I think it's just logistically impossible at this point. Because what Israel did was came in to that area where the Palestinians lived, and they destroyed 400 villages. Where the Palestinians had been, they bulldozed them. And those ruins are all over Israel today. And Israel today is planting trees on top of those ruins wherever they can to try to hide them. But again, that is the root of the rage in Palestine. And this is a map showing each of those black dots shows a Palestinian town that was destroyed. And where did those people go? Well, 2 million of them now are in Gaza. Those people that live there are either themselves refugees if they're very old, or they are descendants of refugees. My grandparents, they lived, anyone in Gaza can tell you where their parents or grandparents lived. That was my home, and it's gone. And so you wonder, why hate Israel? Why hate the Jews? And as I say that, I want to underscore that I have no sympathy for the Hamas attack. I mean, that attack on October 7 was heinous and vile and barbaric and evil. There's no other word for it. It's unacceptable. So I cannot justify that act. But can I explain their anger? I think I can. It really makes sense why there would be this generational rage. And now, since about I'm trying to think when this really broke loose, starting about 1990, some Israelis started building settlements in the West Bank. Okay, remember, this is where the Palestinian people are kind of squeezed into, here in Gaza, and then in refugee camps in Jordan, and refugee camps up here in Lebanon. This is the Hezbollah territory. You hear about Hezbollah sending rockets in. Those are Palestinian refugees who still, hate what Israel has done to them. So Hezbollah refugees up here are sending rockets in. The party that's in Gaza is called Hamas. We've heard a lot about Hamas. It's a pretty brutal political party that's gotten control of Palestinians. These are Palestinians ruling the Palestinians. And one of the main tenets of their ideology is the destruction of Israel. We're going to destroy Israel. And in the West Bank, this area right here where we lived, the political party is Fatah, F-A-T-A-H, and with Mahmoud Abbas. Secretary of State Blinken just met with him yesterday or today, met with Mahmoud Abbas. And Fatah has tried to negotiate with Israel and figure out a way to get along and try to make life better for the Palestinians. And so these three parties generally have not gotten along. Hamas in Gaza generally has not gotten along with Fatah. And Prime Minister Netanyahu actually allowed money to come in from Qatar, millions and millions of dollars, to support Hamas. You heard me right, the Prime Minister of Israel was wanting to support Hamas because he saw it as a balance of power against Fatah, because Fatah wants a two-state solution. What the UN plan has said all along is the long-term solution to this conflict is two states, Israel and Palestine. And the Palestinians, I think, at this point are ready for that. And basically a two-state solution would say, Israel is this and Palestine is this, and we're going to agree not to kill each other and not invade each other or whatever. But in the meantime, look what's happened to Palestine. It's been populated by Jewish people. And somebody, a Palestinian, told me recently, this is like two people deciding we're going to share a pizza. Let's talk about how we're going to share this pizza. And while you're talking about it, one party is just eating the pizza. They're just snarfing it down. Let's keep talking. So all this negotiation that Israel has done and Palestine has done now looks to the Palestinians like it's just smokescreen. Peace talks, baloney. All the time, you're taking our land. And this is what a settlement looks like. This is from very close to the Jordan River, and you're looking up through the Judean desert, and Jerusalem is right up there. And this is this settlement of Mitzpah Jericho. I've hiked from here all the way down to Jericho through the desert once. I don't know anybody in this city, but here's a settlement, and up there is another Jewish settlement, and there is a Jewish settlement, and there is a Jewish settlement. And the Israelis control the water rights in the West Bank. So even though there's somewhat a bit of self-rule by the Palestinians in the West Bank, the Israeli army is everywhere. They have checkpoints all throughout the West Bank. Right now, you can't even get in and out of Bethlehem. I'm grateful I'm not there. Part of my heart wants to be there with people I worked with and love, but I think it's pretty miserable to live there right now. Supplies can't come in. But you just look at that picture, and that's again at the root of the anger of the Palestinian people at Israel. You are building on land that the nations of the world said belongs to us, and you've already chased us out of the western part of the country. And then you have evangelical Christians and quite a number of radio preachers and so forth who say Christians united for Israel. And these people read the Bible and say, well, God promised this land to the Jews. What are you talking about? Of course it belongs to them. And I'm going to just spend the next few minutes talking about that question of how I would understand that. So you get this, a lot of websites have this kind of thing, pray for Israel. And the first Bible verse that will be quoted by the Christian Zionists, by Christian Zionists I mean people who are not Jewish, but who support the establishment of Israel. And I would just pause here as an aside and say, I am a Zionist to the extent that I want Israel to be safe. And I'm glad Israel exists as a nation. I'm glad the Jews can be back. European Jews can be back in their homeland, and Jews from other parts of the world. And there's a lot that I admire about Israel, and I like to travel in Israel, and I have Jewish friends. I'm simply against the injustice that Israel is doing to the Palestinians. That's my concern. But a Christian Zionist then is someone who supports Israel, the establishment of Israel. And one of the Israeli ministers recently said, government ministers said, there's far more Christian Zionists in the world than there are Jewish Zionists. And so we should really be working the Christian church, because the Christian church is supporting us. And they're doing it. And if you're a supporter of what Israel is doing now and you're a church leader, you'll get treated like royalty in Israel, because they see that as significant. So they say, pray for Israel to meet the King of Peace, whatever. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. But the key verse that the Christian Zionists will use is Genesis 12. I will bless those who bless you. That's speaking to Abraham, this person put up here to Israel. And whoever curses you, I will curse, and all peoples in the earth will be blessed through you. So I want to pick up on the last part of that phrase. All peoples in the earth will be blessed by you. All peoples. Even the Palestinians will be blessed. And what is happening now is not the blessing. It's not the fulfillment of that God intended. Genesis 26 says that Abraham could live in the land because he kept covenant with Yahweh. And then the Lord appeared to Isaac, Abraham's son, and said, do not go down to Egypt. Live in the land where I tell you to live. Stay in this land for a while, and I will be with you, and I will bless you. For to you and your descendants I will give all these lands, and will confirm the oath I swore to your father Abraham. I will make your descendants numerous, and I will give them all these lands, and through your offspring all nations on earth will be blessed, because Abraham obeyed me and did everything I required of him, keeping my commands. Well, if that's the only verse that you read about this question, you'd have to say, well, the Bible says land belongs to the Jews. But there's more. The Bible has more than just this. There's any number of places within the Old Testament where God's people are told, if you do not keep covenant, if you do not stop your idolatry, if you do not stop your injustice, the covenant's off. This notion that you can have the land, that's maybe an eternal promise. But you won't be able to enjoy that promise if you don't keep your part of the bargain. That is said just repeatedly. So this is Leviticus 26. If you do not obey me and do not observe all these commandments, if you spurn my statutes and abhor my ordinances, not observe all my commands, break my covenant, I in turn will do this to you. I will bring terror on you. I will turn your cities into ruins and lay waste your sanctuaries. And I will take no delight in the pleasing aroma of your offerings. This is just a sample of a whole long chapter. Read the whole chapter of Leviticus 26. It's horrendous what the Bible says will happen to the Hebrew people if they do not keep covenant and don't do justice and love mercy. So I want to point to passages like this and say, what looks like an unconditional promise turns out to have conditions the whole way through the Old Testament. Isaiah 5, you get to the prophetic literature toward the end of the Old Testament era. Isaiah doing his ministry in late 6th, early 5th century. Woe to you who add house to house and join field to field, till no space is left and you live alone in the land. The Lord Almighty has declared in my hearing, surely the great houses will become desolate. This is a warning against the land grab. And don't just take it all so that there's no room for anybody else. That's not the way you're supposed to live in the land. Jeremiah 7 says you can stay in the land if you act justly, reform your ways and actions. I will let you live in this place. You can study these passages on your own. But again, it's conditions. you will lose your privileges in this land. And I think of when God made this promise to Abraham, this land is yours. These were nomads. These were nomads who moved their flocks around, and there's other peoples there. And I take it that God is saying, Abraham, you can be here. You can be a nomad in this land forever. It's yours. But is it yours alone, like nobody else? Deuteronomy 24 says, be generous to the foreigner. Remember your own history. Do not deprive the foreigner or the fatherless of justice, or take the cloak of the widow as a pledge. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and the Lord your God redeemed you from there. That is why I command you to do this. And then it says, if you're harvesting, leave some of the crop for marginal people. Now, Palestinians don't like to be thought of as the foreigners in the land. They say today, we're the indigenous. The Jewish people coming back, they're the foreigners. But from the Jewish perspective, the Palestinians are foreigners. These people don't belong here. And Deuteronomy, Moses here is saying, treat these people decently. Be generous to them. Ezekiel 47, again, I won't take time to read this. You can look it up. It's about foreigners having rights. And you shall treat the native, you're to consider the foreigners, as native-born Israelites. You treat them decently. This is all through the Old Testament. So when you hear the Christian Zionists say, God promised this land to the Jews, you say, have you read the whole Old Testament? The picture is a little more complex than that. So this is the way the West Bank looks today. This is not settlements now. This is checkpoints. This is where there will be a contingent of Israeli soldiers. That's why this is called the occupied West Bank. It's occupied by Israel. Now, I've traveled a good bit in this area, and just shortly before coming home, I went with the president of the college up to Nablus. We went by these checkpoints. They weren't stopping people. We just drove straight through. But as soon as there's trouble anywhere, boom, these checkpoints close. They want to see ID, and then Palestinians take hours to get to their work. They're separated from their crops. The families are separated. This happens a lot. Now I'm going to show you let me just pause to see if there's questions. That's the historical survey. There's a lot there. Just remember, the basic problem is people with power are taking land from people that have less power. That's the root of it. But do you have any questions or comments or rebuttal?
One other question. When the Palestinians were told that leave and can come back, who told them that? The Arab countries attacking or the Israelis? Because I know there's Arabs that are Israeli citizens.
Yeah, there are. There's 1.5 million Palestinians live in Israel. Yeah, but carry on with your question.
Were they ones that stayed and became citizens because they stayed?
Some of them stayed, and a lot went to Nazareth. And I think they went to Nazareth because it was a Christian city that the Christian church would care about. And I'm not sure exactly why they went there. But there were some who, for whatever reason, stayed. And there wasn't 1.5 million in 1948, but their population has grown too. So, for example, the president of Bethlehem Bible College lives in Israel and commutes into the West Bank daily. He's Palestinian.
But he's an Israeli citizen.
He's a Palestinian Israeli citizen. And if you are a Palestinian in Israel, you're a second-class citizen within Israel. I mean, you can more or less live where you want, but you don't have the same legal rights. You can't serve in the army if you want to do that. There's just restrictions on you. prejudice. It's kind of an apartheid system within Israel. But then if you look at the difference between the West Bank and Israel, it's like dramatic apartheid. Something that even Desmond Tutu said, this is worse than anything we ever had in South Africa. You know, this is. So, but your question originally was who said that? I don't know. I think it would have been the new Israel government. I expect so.
I heard something, because I've done a lot of reading too, and I'd heard that was what the Arab states had said that were attacking. And
Might be.
if you get out of the way, then we have more freer range.
You might be right about that. I don't know that nuance. Or maybe they were both saying, and Israel would have had all reason to say it, and the Arabs might have, the Arabs thought they were going to prevail. The Arab nations thought, we're just going to snuff out this nation in no time. And it didn't work. The Arabs lost to the astonishment of a lot of people around the world. And then Christians in the West sort of said, this is a miracle, you know, Jesus is going to return really soon. Remember that?
88 reasons why Jesus can come in 88.
Yeah, right. Something. There was a whole lot of that kind of thing. Yeah. So, somebody else had a comment or question.
Now, this is a bit off the subject, but as I sit here listening to you, how much different is Israel than what we did to the indigenous American Indians?
The question is, how different is what Israel's done to the Palestinians from what we did to the native peoples in North America? I live in Indiana. That ought to tell me something. Yeah. The land is named for the people that we ran out, and the last indigenous people were taken out by gunpoint in 1838 from Indiana, and in 1842 the first Anabaptists arrived, and we're peace-loving people, and there was land available, and wasn't it wonderful? We settled down and took over, and it's not until years later, generations later, that some of us get pangs of conscience. I recently looked up the deed of my house. I hadn't looked at it in that is the stack of deeds from the past. We bought this house in Elkhart 25 years ago. And just this summer I looked it up, and the earliest owner was Shipashikwe, a Potawatomi woman. She was given some land when the treaty was made that gave away all the Indian land to the Europeans. She was awarded a little plot of land, and it was ours. I mean, our neighborhood there. So your point is very, very well taken. And when the first resolution about Israel-Palestine came in front of MCUSA in 2017, I opposed it. Not because I didn't want to critique what Israel was doing, but because it seemed so self-righteous of just saying, look at what Israel is doing. And I said, we just have to be a little more repentant as Europeans and as Mennonites, that we are complicit ourselves, and we better own that before we, accuse others. And then it was that statement about Israel was redrafted and came up 2 or 3 years ago, and I supported it at that point. I thought, yeah, now we've owned, at least acknowledged our sin as a people. Any other questions? Let me just show you maybe some more happy pictures. I think first I start with a map. Sorry about that. I know you're tired of maps. Oops. But this, you see the West Bank here. It's dotted right there. Bethlehem is just south of Jerusalem. And Israel, of course, controls all this land. It goes deep into what really would be the West Bank, so that Israel controls Jerusalem now. And we're just south of that, about 4 miles south of the edge of Jerusalem. The cities have really grown together. And this map then shows you the green line. The green line right here is the line that the United Nations drew, saying that should be the division between Israel and Palestine. The green line is a term used a lot in discussion of Palestine. Well, that's where the border should be, but in fact, Israel has moved the border into here. This is the border now. And Israel built a wall there starting in 2002. They built this wall, and this goes all the way around here. And you can see now the blue areas, let me start over. The red areas are Palestinian towns. So this is Bethlehem right here, and we lived in the north edge of that, just right near, close to the wall. The blue areas now are what Palestinians call the settlements. This is Jewish towns that are expanding into the West Bank, and this is the big one. The biggest settlement in the West Bank is Ma'ale Adumim. It's a city. It's a freestanding city. It's more than a town now. I mean, it's got libraries and streetlights and schools and the whole works. But gradually, you see, Israel is pushing into the West Bank. And Israel right now, with Prime Minister Netanyahu, has several ministers of government who are, boy, I don't know what to call them other than racists. They have said the kinds of things about Palestinians that the Ku Klux Klan would say about blacks. Same sort of level. And they've said things like, Palestinians are a mistake in this country. We should have finished you off in 1948. Statements like that coming from government minister. Netanyahu was a little bit more moderate, but he had to get this coalition by pulling in the hard right in order to stay in power. So he did it. And that's part of what triggered the Hamas attack, I believe, because this provocation. So at Bethlehem, this right here is the wall that's been built. I think this was drawn before the wall was complete. But the wall, right about here is Bethlehem Bible College. And Ellen and I lived right about over here, not just a few minutes walk from the Bible College. So right in Bethlehem is Rachel's tomb. You might remember Rachel died on her way to south when she was going with who was her husband? I'm confused here. But her tomb is in here, and Israel wanted that, so they extended the wall in a loop that comes like this in through the city of Bethlehem, so Israelis can get into that tomb. And Rachel is important to the Jewish people too. So the Muslim people venerate her. So it was just a way of kind of stealing access to Rachel's tomb. Ellen and I lived right here. I think I circle it. Yep, that's our home right there. So we were on the 3rd floor, and this is entirely Palestinian people. Some of these buildings are partially completed. A lot of the Palestinian families will build a first floor of a house, and they'll build it sturdy, and then when they get more money and have more kids, they build a 2nd story, and when they build a 3rd, and so they'll go up to 4 stories. You might have heard that this week in Gaza, there was a family of 42 that all died, 3 generations. And that would have been one of these houses where the families live all together. They build up as they're able to get money. So there's Ellen, my wife. I have a better picture of her elsewhere. But we're watching our neighbors building another layer on their house in Bethlehem. This was my wife Ellen on the left, and that was our landlady, Nada Lucy. She's Christian. She's been a student at the Bible College, and she and her husband her family system owned the building that we were in. So we were living in one of those apartment buildings with a big Palestinian family. Most of our neighbors were Muslim. And we learned to know people there, and I think, see if I can get this to work. That's me on the right, and there was a wedding on our street wedding celebration on a street, and these people are pretty poor. But they were getting ready for the wedding, and the guys setting things up started to dance. And so you watch me go in there, can't hear the music, sorry. But you see, I'm a Lancaster County farm boy. I don't even know how to dance. And you'll see toward the end of the clip, I sort of get confused and kind of wander away. So then they go into a different kind of dance, you know. And I think, well, I think I'll join that too. And if you could hear the video, Ellen is taking these pictures, and she's just laughing hilariously, because she knows I can't dance. And then they get down, and yeah. Well, enough of that. Let's go on. This is from a hotel roof in Bethlehem, and it's looking out across the city of Bethlehem. And on the horizon, you see Jordan. Those pink mountains are Jordan on the other side of the Dead Sea. This is a very small country. You get to one place up in the north, you can get on Mount Carmel, where Elijah confronted the prophets of Baal. You can stand on that mountain and you can see the Mediterranean Sea here, and you can see Jordan there. You can see the whole width. It's that small of a country, so it's amazing the impact this area has had on the world. And then we bought our groceries often out in the streets. There's Ellen negotiating for strawberries. It really is that central highlands right south of Bethlehem really is kind of an area of milk and honey. The grapes are huge, just like the spies discovered, the huge grapes. And I'm stopping here on Manger Square for a cup of coffee on a cold morning. This would be Palestinian women doing needlework. Mennonites were involved in training some of these Palestinian women, or helping them, I should say, reestablish their traditional arts of needlecraft. And this was our lawn mowing service. There would be a flock of sheep would come through the city, and where there's green areas, the sheep would come in, and they'd be there for 2 hours or so, and shepherd would take them on. See the shepherd in the bottom left there. So this picture is from our balcony. And I think this is more dancing here. Yeah, I'm not on this picture. The old guy in the center there with the dark jacket, it was his 80th birthday, and he was the father of my wife's boss at the rehab center where she worked. So we got invited to the party. But we found the Palestinian people to be wonderfully hospitable. Wherever we went in Bethlehem, people just universally would say, welcome. Even little kids, if they didn't know any other word, they knew the word welcome. Welcome. Where are you from? What's your name? And we felt safe in Bethlehem. We could walk across the city of Bethlehem at midnight alone with no fear at all. I wouldn't do that in Elkhart. And at least where we were based in the Bible college and in the community we had, I never heard one word of hatred for Israel or one word of hatred for the Jews. Never heard it. What those people would express is their grief at their losses. Just constant losses, loss of opportunity, loss of their kids because their kids couldn't get work. They'd get college degrees, university degrees. There was no jobs, so they'd move to Seattle or someplace. Lost our kids. This is what Israel wants. It's really a policy of making life so miserable in the West Bank that the Palestinians will leave. And I think that's part of what's happening in Gaza. The Jews talk about the Holocaust. The Palestinians talk about the Nakba. Nakba is the Arabic word for catastrophe. And Nakba has a very special meaning, just like Holocaust has a meaning. And the Palestinians are now saying there's another Nakba going on in Gaza. We are being depopulated and killed from there, like happened in 1948. So Ellen buying some kind of peas there from a kid on the street. Oh, yeah, these were our friends, little kids in the neighborhood that the one phrase that we heard from each of them every day was, "What's your name?" They didn't know anything else. "What's your name?" And so half of the guys, little boys, are named Muhammad, and yeah. So they didn't speak English, we didn't speak Arabic. So you'd speak in signs and wonders. You make signs and they'd wonder what it means. And sometimes Ellen would sit out and play her guitar and the kids would gather around. And these two little girls right here, they just adored Ellen. They just looked at her, whenever she came by like she was an angel. And I couldn't argue with that, I guess. So there's Ellen and me, and this is Star Street going up. This is the historic street in Bethlehem. A lot of Bethlehem is not particularly pretty. A lot of it feels a little slummy, but the oldest part really has some gorgeous architecture in it. And this is the street by which by tradition the wise men would have come up to go to the manger. And markets out in the street. They also had department stores, not as big as we have here, but we could get groceries there. But the streets, some of the streets of Bethlehem, every day of the week would be filled, except Friday. Friday's the holy day, would be filled with all kinds of goods being sold. And that hill is where the Church of the Nativity is. That's the Church of the Nativity right there. So this hilltop in the center of the city is the historic part. And I'm getting a haircut there, and I took that picture, and what you see there at my ear is a cigarette lighter, and the barber is singeing the hair off of my ear with a flame, and he would just start going like this, and he didn't ask permission to do that. All of a sudden there's this flame in my ear. I said, "Wait a minute." And so he did one ear, and then I took a picture in the mirror when he did the other one. Mennonite Central Committee has been in Palestine since 1949. They were there, one of the earliest Western church groups to be there, working with refugees. And Mennonite Central Committee is still there, using Palestinian people as their staff now, pretty much. But the man there in the blue shirt is James Alty. He's Canadian. And he was director for the last 4 years, just finished his term there with his assistant, Iklas, who's a good friend of ours. And then MCC had a group of young adults, what did they call that program? The Sikh program, who came and lived in Palestine for 6 months and did various service projects and just learned to know the Palestinian people and do a lot of Bible study. And we related to them, and I did some teaching with them. The Bible College was started in 1972, and it is these buildings right here. That's the original building right there. Then they have a residence there and a classroom building back there. It's not a residential college. That is, the students are commuters. They're all Palestinians, predominantly women students right now. And I try to think, how's that going to work in a patriarchal society where basically men run stuff, including the church? So this is a very interesting phenomenon. But this is on Hebron Road, and you can't see it real clearly, but that's the wall right down there. The wall comes there. That's where Rachel's tomb is. This is Hebron Road. This is the old way of the patriarchs that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob walked on. Yeah, it's the old road that is still there. And when there were demonstrations against the Israelis in Bethlehem, they would almost always happen on this street. And so the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, would come down from their opening in the wall, and they'd come down through here with their trucks and big guns and so forth, and kids would be throwing rocks at them and burning tires, and I would just try to stay out of there. I'd work at home those days, but that happened several times while we were there, and I never got tear gassed. When I arrived there, somebody said, "We get used to the smell of tear gas," and I never got close enough to it. I just didn't want to take a bullet. This is the founder of Bethlehem Bible College, Bashar Awad on the left, and his wife Selwa on the right. He's now 83 or something, and gracious old man. He recently wrote a book, co-wrote it with a woman named Mercy Aiken. I think she sort of ghost wrote it, but it's a very good book. It's called Yet in the Dark Streets Shining. If you want a story of what it was to be a Palestinian living through 1948, he can tell the story. His father was shot and killed by a sniper. His dad wasn't in the army, but his dad was out getting water or shopping or something during the war, and he was shot and killed by a sniper. So Bashara was raised in an orphanage. And so he tells the whole story of that experience, and then how Christian faith really brought him to a place of peace. These are the faculty and staff at the college at our Christmas gathering. And they would all be speaking Arabic to each other, but most of them, particularly the instructors, were bilingual or trilingual, so they would speak to me in English. And I worked very closely with the man on the left, Andrew Bush, Dr. Andrew Bush, who is retired now from Eastern College in Philadelphia, a missiologist, but he's spent about 29 years investing considerable time each year in Palestine, and lived in Palestine all through the last Intifada. The Intifada means an uprising, and 2 of those uprisings happened, and I think we're on the cusp of a 3rd one now. That is when the Palestinians as a whole society rise up, and there's unfortunately a lot of violence. But Andrew supervised my work, and he and his wife are still in Bethlehem, and we have frequent contact with them and are really concerned about, well, their safety and just everything that's happening there. This was Dr. Munter Isaac on the left. He's an eminent Palestinian liberation theologian, and he's dean of the college. He also is pastor at 2 Lutheran churches, one of them a big church, senior pastor at these, and he's all over the world speaking and preaching about Palestine. He came back from a trip to Poland and Germany in the fall, not long after I arrived. And when he talked to the faculty, he came back, Munter said, I went to a death camp. I went to one of the Jewish concentration camps and the ovens, the gas chambers. He said, it's just a devastating experience to me to see that. He said, what the Jewish people suffered is just beyond imagining. And we have to keep that in mind as Palestinians as we relate to the Jewish people. But he said, who is it that is suffering today for what the Germans did under Hitler? Is it the grandchildren of the people who did that? No, he said, they're doing fine. He said, it's us. It's the Palestinians. We are paying the price for what Hitler did. Because after World War II, so many people in the West, including the United States, felt guilty for not having done more to save the Jews. The United States, limited the number of Jews that could come in. They were trying to get out of Germany. The United States limited the number, wouldn't let many in. And so I think it's an act of guilt, and also just the horrors of the Holocaust. Let's let the Jewish people let's not criticize them. And so today, if you criticize Israel, you are likely to be accused of anti-Semitism. You hate the Jews. And I really protest when that comes up. I do not hate the Jews. I do not hate Judaism. I do not hate Israel. I hate what's happening in the West Bank. It has to stop. And now it's happening in Gaza. And today was the heaviest bombing of Gaza anytime since the war started. We are right in the worst of it right now. And The count today of people that, by today, the people that had died in Gaza, Palestinians, is at 9,700 people have died. And half of those are children, half of those are kids. So this is making a wound, hugely deep wound within the Palestinian psyche. And you might tamp down the violence and the revolt for a generation with this, but it'll be back. That kind of hatred and that cycle of violence, only the love of Jesus can break. And this really worries me a lot. This woman here, let me back up here. Woman on the far right, these are some of the, I think some of these women are students at the college. They were decorating a Christmas tree. I worked in the library a lot at the college, and Hala on the far right was the librarian. And she told me that her family owns an olive grove that fell on the other side of the wall when the wall came through. Maybe you saw how the wall was moved into Palestinian territory. Their olive grove, and they still own it. But she said year after year, and it happened again this year, Israel will not let them get to that olive grove until after the harvest is ruined. Okay, so it happened again this year. Okay, you can go to your olive grove now. They go there and it's all ruined. It's that kind of harassment, that kind of just petty cruelty that is happening all over the West Bank, and most Americans don't know it, or don't believe it. And I can just say I saw it. I'll end with a hopeful story here. I probably have 100 more pictures, so we could go on a while, but it's late. What do we do in this situation? We pray. We maybe speak up if someone says God gave this land to Israel and it belongs to them. You say, well, the story might be a little more complicated than that. There are conditions to that. And the conditions are obedience to God, which is not what Israel's doing. Modern Israel has never done that. And it's do justice and love mercy and walk humbly with your God. So we as Christians are going to, and just as decent human beings, are going to care about justice for Israel and care about justice for Palestine. And we're not going to just take sides and make the other into demons. Both sides have done horrible things. Both sides have experienced horrible things. There's a woman from Colorado named Mercy Aiken, A-I-K-E-N. She co-wrote this book with Bashara Awad, this book called Yet in the Dark Streets Shining. It's a story about Bethlehem, modern Bethlehem. She has lived in Bethlehem on and off for years. She comes over for stretches of time and does teaching and academic and other projects, service projects. She's a courageous person. And pretty often, at least once a week, Ellen and I would go through the wall. We'd go through the checkpoints to go into Israel. We'd have reason to be there. Our church was in Jerusalem, in East Jerusalem. Or sometimes we'd need to go to a doctor appointment or something. So we were pretty familiar with that. And you get on a bus in Bethlehem, and it's strictly a Palestinian bus. I've never, ever seen a Jewish person on it. And the bus then will go through the checkpoint and go into Jerusalem. But when you get to the checkpoint, everybody in the bus has to get off. And you line up in whatever weather it is, you line up outside. And there will be a couple of young Israeli soldiers standing somewhere within sight. They always have their guns slung around them like this, walking around, often fingers on the trigger, or at least when they get near anybody. So they'll be over there talking and smoking, and you'll stand there in the sun or the rain or whatever it is for 5 or 10 minutes, and then they'll say, okay, we're going to go check these passports. So everybody lines up, and most Palestinians cannot go into Israel. It's not a simple matter of having a passport. You have to have a permit to go in. Some have permanent permits to go in because they work in restaurants or whatever. But Mercy Aiken was near the end of the line one morning this spring coming to church. And she got up to the guards, and the guards were always decent to Americans. You know, I'd show my American passport, and they'd just say, on the bus, you know, go ahead. But Mercy got up there, and she realized over to one side was a little Palestinian lady. And Mercy said, this woman seemed slightly disoriented. It was like a little person, you know, with bad teeth and a couple of bags she was carrying. And she had been denied entry. And Mercy went up to these two, it would have been 3 guards there, and said, why is this woman not getting on the bus to go into Jerusalem? And the soldier said, she doesn't have a permit, she doesn't have the papers. Mercy said, what harm would it do to Israel to let this little old lady go in and see her family or go to a doctor's appointment? And the bus driver said, come on, get on the bus, you know, stop. Mercy said no, and she went over and she put her arms around this woman and just embraced her. And she said, and she went over to the soldier, and she said she looked in his eyes and she thought she saw just a glimmer of humanity. And she said, you let this woman on this bus. The guards kind of looked at each other a little bit and said, okay. And she went on. And it's just a small story, but that story inspired me to be willing to take some action and to do it in love. The book of 1 Peter says, always be prepared to give a defense for the hope that is in you, but do it with gentleness and reverence. You know, and that's the way we engage conflict, even in Israel-Palestine, or the many polarities going on in our country right now and in our church. We can have our convictions and we can say what we believe, but we do it with gentleness and reverence that conveys respect for the other person and honors our Lord. Any comments before I sit down here? Yeah.
My take from what you say is, apart from Jesus transforming people's lives, we're going to see this happen, continue to happen forever over there.
Like, is this going to go on forever unless people really know the love of Jesus?
Right.
Yeah.
Because that's my perception of the conflict and
Yeah.
knowing history, not just Palestinian, Jewish history, but world history.
Yeah. Yeah, history is the slaughter bench in which the hopes of dreams of peoples have been, who was it said that, Nietzsche or somebody? Am I giving a counsel of despair tonight? I confess at this moment it's hard to keep the hope. And then you have to remember apartheid 40 years ago in South Africa looked impossible. How would this ever change? And it did. And the Berlin Wall looked so formidable, and it came down. Things do go right in history sometimes, even in bad situations. I'm just concerned that we as Christians be part of the healing, in the healing direction, and not exacerbating situation. And I mean, I didn't get to talk about some other things that were on this my pictures, but I found hope in the work of, say, a man named Salim Munayer. Salim Munayer is a Palestinian theologian. He lives in Israel and teaches at Bethlehem Bible College. He was dean there for a while. But for 30 years, he has regularly organized weekend retreats for Messianic Jews and Palestinian Christians. So you'd think Christians ought to be able to just get along, but even by Messianic Jews, these are Jewish people who believe in Jesus. And then obviously Palestinian Christians. So he will get these people together for a series of weekends to learn to know each other. And he has a book that came out of that called Through My Enemy's Eyes. And it's his experience, and it's actually co-written by a Jewish woman, Lisa Loden. So she's Christian, Jewish. But they deal here in this book with the deep struggle of their two communities trying to relate to each other. And both of these people give me great hope. I have to look for signs of hope where they are. And the Bible College was an island of hope and joyous worship and commitment to reconciliation and nonviolence. There's other, and in Israel, at least up until October 7, there was quite a number of small but potent Jewish organizations calling for justice for the Palestinians. Not all Israelis support what's happening in Gaza. A lot of them do, but some don't. And those are the people we need to be allied with and support the peacemakers on both sides of this intractable conflict that seems to just go on and on and on. Northern Ireland's another place. I visited Northern Ireland. I lived in London for 5 years during the Troubles and got to Northern Ireland and met people that were in the front lines of the conflict there. A peace deal came through in Ireland. So I want to look at these places where, yes, hopeful things actually happened. They came to fruition, and say, please God, let this happen in Palestine. Let this happen in Israel.
Is there a possibility that one agreement would be made in the West Bank that's not made in Gaza? Like, would they function differently?
Or like a separate peace. Yeah. That let Hamas do what they want. Well, Fatah in the West Bank was sort of trying to do that. Fatah was trying to get along with Israel. Not all Palestinians liked that. But then Gaza was under a Palestinian government that said, no way. But the Fatah government has really lost the confidence of a lot of Palestinian people. I think there's been corruption and kind of just lack of leadership. Or by corruption, I mean sort of leaders kind of bought off by Israel. They get taken care of by Israel really nicely and maybe don't look out for their own people. So that's the suspicion of the Palestinians in the West Bank. Let's join our hearts in prayer. God, we are sobered today by the cycle of violence, and we grieve the loss of life of Israelis and Palestinians. We grieve the surging hatred that has emerged in that land and even in this country and in Europe against Arabs, against Palestinians, against Jews. Lord, have mercy. Kyrie eleison. We long for our Lord to come, the Prince of Peace. We long for the time when swords will be beat into plowshares. when nation will not lift up sword against nation or study war anymore. Thank you for Jesus, who taught us to lay down the sword, who loved his enemies right to the end, who died for us even while we were enemies of God. Thank you for that love that you've shown in Christ. Thank you for being with us as a broken humanity, and we long to be like Jesus and to have our world live under your just reign. May your kingdom come. May your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Come, Lord Jesus. Amen.
Thank you, Nelson, for that informative time. I do need to apologize. As you were talking, I remember you used the word heavyweights and not big guns. That wasn't fair to you. I'm sorry about that. But you still fit the definition here. We would like to receive an offering this evening, and I'm going to ask people to come forward if they would. While they're coming, I'll let you know that there is a book table in the back, and on that table there's several of the book that I showed you earlier that Nelson has written. So if you want to purchase that, you can. There are some other books there for previous resource people who've been here that you can help yourself to. Go ahead. We have 2 more evenings with Nelson here, starting at 7:15, so we encourage you to come back. Going to be based on talking about reconciliation, both evenings. An appropriate Anabaptist subject, particularly pertinent for the times we live. Alrighty. Marvin, do you have a closing hymn?
Oh, I do.
Okay.
It's out of the Blue Hymnal, number 403. 403. Shall we stand as we sing this song? The Church of Christ in Every Age. Some of you may not know it, but I think you'll pick it up quickly enough. The Church of Christ in every age, beset by change, but Spirit-led, must claim and test its heritage, and keep on rising from the dead. Across the world, across
Marvin. That was very appropriate. Appreciate that. All righty. Thank you all for coming. God bless you all. See you tomorrow night.